We're seeing the markets subdued today, but we've seen a general improvement in the Kenyan markets, but this week turnover low. Why is that?
Well, if you look at where we are in terms of the month, we are at the midway point. And then if you notice, there are more of the domestic investors exiting, and you notice there's been a lot of interest in foreign investors. One of the things that you need to notice that it's actually culminating around that period where what you call the Form 1 selection process has been ongoing. Students who are in what is called Class 8 are now about to join Form 1, and some of the parents are now in preparation for the schools that the children have been accepted. There's that extra bit of cash that you've kept aside, in the sense of you have your stocks and you have a bit of deposits, which is now you're realizing it to be able to now put towards the first-term school fees, so to speak.
All right, what we have seen also is that foreigners are heavily involved in the market, and it's because of them that something like the Safaricom counter has been driven up. But I want to speak about the institutional investors and why they're holding back at the moment. Everybody's saying it's because we're going to be seeing the release of Q4 results. Is that it?
Yes. Yes, that's been one of the key reasons. If you notice, they've been actually adopting a wait and see. But if you also go by the just concluded KPLC rights issue, you notice that the market is actually behaving in a very interesting manner. Those who are deemed to be not interested are actually very much interested. But now, going by the way most companies or most institutional investors are structuring their portfolios, they are now going towards investments that will make sense to them going forward. And if you look at, like now, if you notice on the commercial services sector, where Safaricom is in that sector, has actually been one of the most heavily traded, accounting to almost 79% of the total volume in the market. And what happens is that you notice that the way forward, they're looking at, one, is this going to be a viable investment for us? Because as a foreign investor, the ability to pull out is way much faster than it is for the institutional investors. They may be held back by certain systems and procedures within the organization that may not allow them to pull out as swiftly as a foreign investor would.
All right, let's look at specific stocks. The banks have been very good performers, but not in the last week. And obviously it's because of the results season and profit taking, because they've done really well in the last year. Equity, a heavily traded stock today, but KCB, which has been a market favorite, a bit down today. Why is that?
Well, if you notice by the way the trends go, it's almost like they each replace the position of the heavily traded stock. 1 week or two, you notice equity is at the forefront. Then another week, you notice KCB, and also another bank to note has been Cooperative Bank, that has been steadily moving towards the heavily traded counters as far as the stock market is concerned. So it tends to be, one, KCB announced that they're planning to restructure. In fact, they engaged a consultancy firm to now move them, they say in their own words, from good to great, and from great to be one of the best banks in the market. So I guess everyone is waiting to see what will this entail, because they've also mentioned there'll be issues of maybe they might end up having an issue of job losses, and also might be retained earnings as opposed to dividends being given out.
All right, in the agricultural stocks, we've seen a lot of interest in Sassini, and we did get their results late last year, and they've done really well because of great harvests. Is that situation expected to persist, because we're already talking about drought conditions in Kenya?
And that's actually my point. Yeah, that's the point where I'm heading at. Remember, the agricultural stocks are seasonal, just like the weather. Good rain, like we experienced in 2010, you notice the agricultural stocks were right at the top in terms of profit. And then the same happens whenever the weather conditions change drastically, so do the profits. What happens to their book balances? They tend to have now less crop production. But going by what I notice, if you look at the just concluded trade, the demand for coffee and tea has been actually exceptionally high. One, because wherever the markets are, the European markets, there's been sustained cold snap periods, which will actually will create a demand for the coffee and the tea. And if you go by it, you notice like a 50 kg bag of coffee is almost going for about the equivalent of $1,000 US. So going by that, you notice that despite the weather conditions, they still have an avenue whereby they'll be able to generate profit.
All right, let's talk about industrials, and here specifically Kenyan. Obviously, the spotlight's been on KPLC with their rights issue. Very good subscription. They've raised over 9.8 billion shillings. But what about others within that space? Kenyan down 5%.
Yeah, well, Kenyan has been a very interesting stock to know, because going by when they released the way they are, or what is their strategic plan and what they plan to do to engage in terms of increase power distribution or that much, or power generation, I stand corrected. There is that element of also profit taking. Like I mentioned earlier, these are the counters that, if you look at the trend of domestic investors, these are some of the counters that they were heavily traded in. So you'd find a segment that is actually looking at, let me take in a bit of the profit, and that would affect in terms of the trade.
All right, and let's talk about the shilling, because with other analysts, we've struggled to get to this particular point. We've seen the shilling somewhere in the region of 80.80 today. Others saying that going into the future, it's reasonable to believe the shilling would stabilize at 81.70. So expectations of further depreciation for the shilling. What are the variables that are at play here? We know the shilling often tracks the euro, and with regards to Eurozone sovereign debt issues persisting, how vulnerable is the Kenyan shilling? And then, of course, we spoke about the drought. To what extent is it going to introduce inflationary issues, raising the price of electricity, raising the price of foodstuffs?
Well, I would say with regards to that, yes, it's been actually a very interesting model, in the sense that one of the key things that has happened is that the central bank has been playing an active role. And if you notice, when they realize that at the point where the shilling is actually losing out, especially like you mentioned with the Eurozone being depressed and everything, they'll be able to actually like bolster it to try and ensure that, number one, trade continues and there's a lot of income. Like if you notice what has been happening, consumption tax has actually increased. So going by that, it shows that incomes have actually gone up. But in the sense of foreign trade and everything, the cold period has affected a lot of exports for that matter, and we've not had that active trading. So it's not as serious as it would be, but given the next few weeks is something to see. But going by it, the traditional 80, 79, I foresee it being at that period for a couple of weeks to come.